had other people contacting her too, from, all different organizations. And there was a couple who called me and said, they said, my parents used to own the amusement park that was where Grizzly is now, Kittyland or whatever it was.
Oh.
We'd like to do a QR code and just send everybody over to Christine. Use their business.
Everyone knows that. All right, you ready there, David? All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Iowa Files. Today, we have what I think is going to be an absolutely fascinating story, and it's not because I used to live in Woodland Cemetery and wander through there in October and get freaked out. So, Woodland Cemetery was founded in 1848. That was 3 years before Des Moines was incorporated as a city. It was one of the earliest Victorian garden cemeteries. That meant that the Victorians really loved going to cemeteries, having picnics. It was so much effort to get to a cemetery. They just made it an all-day affair. So it has beautiful, very old oak trees, beautiful rolling hills, and it served also as the city's first park. People could be buried at Woodland, I just learned, regardless of race, religion, or income. So today's authors are volunteers who love telling the stories of those now at rest at Woodland Cemetery. Mary Radcliffe Christopher is a fifth-generation Iowan who lives in Des Moines. And Mike Rowley is an Iowa native who spent much of his early years with his grandparents, soaking up their history. So this is going to be a fantastic program. I want to thank the West Des Moines Public Library and the Foundation for helping sponsor this, Diana and Scott Hatfield, and of course our members and donors, which we hope you will consider becoming one of those supporters today. So thank you so much, and please go right ahead.
Thank you, Gail. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Can you hear me in the back? Yep, good, good, good. Welcome, come on in. Thank you. Yeah, thumbs up is always good back there. I'm going to start the presentation today, and then partway through, I'll turn it over to Mike. First, I want to say we're not the only volunteers on this team. There were 9 of us who worked on this book, and I'll talk about those people in a minute here. But the book is up here if you're interested to buy a copy. The money goes to Friends of Des Moines Parks, and it all goes, anything left over goes into a fund for woodland restoration. So nobody's getting paid for this book at all, and it's, if you have been, who's been to Woodland? Wow, good job. Who's been on a tour there? Good, a lot of people on the tours too. If you were around Woodland back in the 70s or 80s, and I was, you would have seen that it was really in disrepair. There were a lot of stones knocked over, there was a lot of vandalism. Drive through there today, I mean, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I've never seen it look so great in my lifetime, and we're just really proud of that. And I have never seen such a team of volunteers so dedicated ever before in my life. So that's a pretty cool thing too. So we're going to go ahead and walk through this presentation. And please ask any questions that you want as we go, or save your questions for the end. Whichever is more comfortable for you is fine with us. We're pretty easy going. Okay, Mr. Mike, you're up. So the Woodland tours have gone on for a long time. We don't really know how long. I found this picture from the 1960s, and that's George Mills, the editor of the Register, giving a tour to a group of ladies there. And then a more recent tour guide, Gerald LeBlanc, who passed away just a few years ago and passed the torch to Archie Cook, who is our tour guide now and was one of the members of our team. So today there's the Woodland Historical Tour. That's the one that's been around for a long time. There's also a Civil War tour specifically for people who served in the Civil War. And there's both Union and Confederate soldiers buried at Woodland and veterans. Then there's a brand new women's tour. It just started a year ago, I want to say, and that's super cool. And then there's also a tour now of Glendale Cemetery. So those tours start in April. They go monthly, every month through October, and you can sign up online at Des Moines Parks to go on one of those tours. They're super fun. They do take some time. Woodland's very hilly. It's a lot of walking. It's one of the reasons we thought about, let's write a book, for that person who wants to sit in their lazy boy and read about a tour instead of actually going on it. So, okay. Mike. Oh, you've already moved us forward. Oh, he's amazing. Okay. So this is our volunteer team. Archie Cook, the tour guide. John Zeller with the cap on. We call him the walking encyclopedia of Des Moines, Iowa. And if he were here today, and if Gail would have said the cemetery opened in 1849, he would have said 48. You know, I mean, and that's how he is about every single detail. He's really amazing. He also has a twin, and they like to play pranks on us. So anyway, so that was fun. And then behind me is Dave Holmgren. I know Dave's working on a project right now with Gail. He's a volunteer at the State Historical Society, and he is kind of in charge of their, I don't know what his title is, but their underground railroad project. So he was a volunteer writer and editor on the book. The next fellow is Mr. Rowley, out of uniform. It's hard to recognize him. That's him. And then the next guy, Wade Fowler, he was the youngster on our team, besides Mike, of course. He was the youngster on our team. He has 1.5 million followers on social media, and all he does on social media is repair gravestones. Yeah, so it's very, very cool. He's called the Millennial, Mike, you have to help me. Mr. Millennial Stone.
We'll get back to you.
Yeah, we'll get back to you on that. The Millennial Stone something. And he videotapes himself. He's got all these cameras around. And he has the most phenomenal stories. He was at Glendale one day, saw a little piece of white stone sticking out of the ground, dug it up. He's like the only person allowed with a shovel in the cemeteries, believe me. So he digs it up, and he finds one of those little baby bed stones. Have you all seen those before? And he puts it all back together, repairs it, makes it into a beautiful little white baby bed again. Now we have the name of the person who's buried there. And then he goes to the nursery and buys red geraniums to plant. So he was a really cool addition to our team. He actually is filming us now doing videos for his followers. And so Mike and I are going to be famous, so that's really cool. And then Christine Bartley, who has seen the QR codes over at Woodland? Anybody? So there's QR codes stuck in the ground. You're going to see them throughout our presentation. There's about 150 now so far. Each one tells a story of somebody who's buried there. The story might be videotaped by a descendant, which is cool, or by Archie Cook, the tour guide, which is cool, but it really brings people to life. And it's something that's being copied all over the country, all over the world. It's been publicized so far that I'll tell you a story in a couple minutes about somebody who found it out in Louisiana and the result of that. Ganesh Gampat is the cemetery manager for the 7 Des Moines cemeteries. He's the one who sponsored the book. He found donors for us for our expenses. He's been super duper supportive. There are 2 people who are not in the photograph who couldn't be. One is Jeff Cleaver, who is the Civil War tour guide. And he used to run one of the Civil War camps on the East Coast. He's very knowledgeable about the Civil War. And then the other is Paul French. Paul is a map maker for 5 states' cemeteries in the Midwest. He lives in Burlington on the Mississippi, and he made all of the maps for our book. He also makes all the maps for the cemetery. So if you go to Woodland and you see the giant, huge map at the entrance, that's Paul French. So those 9 people made up our whole team. And as you go through the book, there will be articles that you'll see are written by MC and MR, that's us, JZ, John Zeller, or Christine Bartley, and you'll see initials after every story. You can tell who worked on that story, which is kind of fun. Thanks, Mike. I think I told you all that good stuff already. I should say that the idea from the book was sparked during COVID, when I would go to the cemetery every day, drive in, meet my brother in his car, and we would walk our dogs. And one day I said, you know, Jay, it'd be really cool if there was a book at the library and I could go get it and we could like look for specific people in the cemetery. So I drove over to the library and guess what? There wasn't any book. But now there is. Okay. So, okay, go ahead. Thank you, Mike.
Whoops, too many?
Yeah, there you go. So when I say there's 2 remarkable stories, there's actually something like 40 or 50,000 remarkable stories. But the 2 that I want to mention today, the first is the Gold Star plot. If you drive in the main entrance of the cemetery, then they're at MLK and Woodland Avenue. On your right, you will see the Hubble crypt, which is not a mausoleum, it's a crypt. Everyone there is buried underground. There's a elevator in it that takes the casket down. There's winding steps that take humans down to the service below the ground. There's a generator that runs that elevator and runs all the lights And it was built at a great cost that today it would be well over $1 million. That's the first thing you see on your right. Right after that, you'll see the Gold Star Cemetery. In the Gold Star Cemetery, there are 40 men who were killed mostly in France in World War I by mustard gas, most of them. And they were buried in France under wooden crosses. Of course, they had families back here, and their mothers and wives and sweethearts and fathers got together and formed a committee in Des Moines and said, let's bring these guys back. And that's what they did. And it took a few years. There was a lot of fanfare. Their airplanes were met out at the airport with thousands and thousands of people. Some of these guys laid in state at the Capitol before they were interred at Woodland. And then they were buried in this Gold Star plot, which actually has the same rules as Arlington National, so no family can be buried there with them. So one of the people on the committee was Minnie Fleur. Now you've all driven down Fleur Drive, right? And her husband's picture is right here, Edwin Fleur. He was in his 40s when he was called to go fight in the war. And when Minnie wanted to bring him back, she started the committee to make that happen for all the men and boys. The average age here was 23 of these men. And she knew she couldn't be buried with her husband, so she bought a lot and put up a stone right across the little cemetery road from him. And so you'll see Minnie Fleur there in the cemetery as well. The other story I want to mention is Baby Hill. These are 540 babies all buried together, which wouldn't have been unusual back in those days, but this was a very rural cemetery. A lot of these babies would have died between 1900 and 1910. They would have been with families who were generally going west, and when a baby died, you buried the baby where you were, and so that's what would have happened to these babies. Now, for decades and decades, these babies just had a little metal marker stuck in the ground with a number on it. And anybody could go to the cemetery office and see that baby number 48 was so-and-so, but that's all we knew. We knew what year they died, maybe what year they were born, didn't know any more at all, until somebody in Louisiana, here's my story, read about the QR codes. And she contacted Christine Bartley, who's on our team and is in charge of those codes, and talked to her, and she said, this lady said, we live in Louisiana, but 100 years ago our family went west, and we lost a little boy on the way, and he died, and we've never been able to find him. Well, they found him. There he is. Oh, gosh. Yeah. And his name was Frank Law. He was 3 years old. That was back when they dressed little boys in dresses, and if we had colored pictures, you'd find that a lot of little boys were dressed in pink and little girls in blue. But he's a very attractive little boy. We don't know how he died, but he was just 3 years old. So it's kind of a cool story in terms of technology now in the cemeteries, because I feel like there's 539 other babies there. I'll bet we'll start to learn about who some of those other ones are. And it's a really cool connection. And it was super cool for that family, having looked since, I think, like 1903, to finally find this little guy. Yeah, really super cool. Hey, come on. Okay, so our Woodland book, we have Archie Cook on our team. He's the tour guide. So we said, hey, Archie, how about we start the book with your tour? So he liked that. And that was the one that people were requesting of us. People who couldn't go and walk 2.5 miles up and down hills really wanted to go on Archie's tour. So we started the book with that. But then we moved on into 5 other tours of the cemetery that are a little bit more far-flung, because Archie's tour kind of tends to be pretty close to that main entrance. So we've got 6 tours altogether in the book, and they each come with a map. That's just an example of one of the maps. So people's initials are on the map, and you can kind of just move through. If you move through in the same order as the book, that's kind of the shortest way to tour one of those maps. There's also a map that includes a lot going on in one map. It shows all the Des Moines schools, all the people who Des Moines schools were named after. It shows people who Des Moines streets were named after, and it shows 18 of those tree stones that look like a tree stump. and kind of talks about those. So that's kind of cool, little different tour for you to take. We wrote about 1/4 of 1% of the people buried at Woodland. There's somewhere between, a lot of people say 40 or 50,000 people. Sometimes you'll read 80,000 people. What we know for sure is there's a paupers section, which the cemetery is broken down into blocks. I think there's 22 blocks, something like that, and then lots within the blocks. And the paupers section is in block 13. Which I always thought was kind of weird, like maybe it was going to be unlucky for other people to be buried over there or something, I don't know. But that's Pauper's Field. We don't know how many thousands of people are there, but we do know that exactly 100 years ago in 1924, the Gravediggers Union refused to dig any more graves in that section because they ran into bones every time. Yeah, so there's a lot of people. And then I was telling Gail today, somebody reached out to me at a recent presentation and said, I can't believe you didn't write about my family. You know, they were really important in the community, and they have a really cool stone. And I just said, holy cow, I wish we could write about every family. It would be 1,000 volumes, you know. So we really had to decide who to include, and more importantly, who not to include in the book. And in doing our research, we realized there's a lot of information out there at the historical societies and other places about rich men who were very successful in Des Moines and West Des Moines and so forth. And we wanted to mention some of those men, but we really wanted to talk about women and people of color and people who had been in the services and all different children, all different kinds of people. So that's how we kind of focused, and our team would meet once a month and literally kind of battle over who's going to be in the book. I want my person in the book. I don't want your person in the book. And the youngster on our team, Wade, would just say, oh, knock it off. You know, let's move on. Come on, guys. So that was fun.
Mary, can I just mention one thing on the number of burials? So one of the things on the burials, because people go, well, how can you not know how many people are buried there? So the city has a list, and you can access it online, and it's got about 40,000 names of all the people in all the sections of Woodland Cemetery. However, you know, due to fires and floods and poor management and, you know, God knows what else, other reasons for not being complete, we've seen newspaper articles as early as 1920 that said at that time they had 57,000 known burials. So that was 100 years ago. So we know there's literally tens of thousands of people there that right now we don't have access to their names. So didn't mean to make it more confusing, but that's kind of why there's a little discrepancy. So, did she just bail out on me?
Yeah, pretty much. You want to talk? Go for it.
No,
I'm
that's
kidding.
it.
I'm kidding. Thanks for adding that, Mike. So we wanted the stories to be unique, right? One of the stories that was pretty unique was the story of the oldest woman in Des Moines. And on her death certificate, it says she's 115 years old. We did some research into like how old a woman would be and still be able to have children. And we think she was about 15 or 20 years younger than she claimed to be. But Mike, you got a picture of her here somewhere, I feel like, don't you?
We have one later in the presentation.
Later,
I don't know
okay.
if she told her husband she was only 94, or I don't know how that works. But
Yeah, it was great because every year the newspaper came out, did a big story. Her daughter would make her a cake and put like 1 billion candles on it. And then her face would be in the newspaper along with her cake and all these candles. I think she got a gag out of that. So a unique story is something else that we were looking for. Again, we have Confederate soldiers at Woodland, and one of them owned a plantation in the South during the Civil War. So that was pretty unique. A unique monument, and I talked about the Hubble Crypt. There's a lot of other really unique monuments that we kind of focused on. And a lot of them were ones that I had wondered about forever. Like, why does that guy have a 15-foot monument of an angel holding an anchor? Well, turned out to be a pretty cool story. So, and last but not least, unusual funerals. So there was a funeral where a guy in a band, he was pretty well known in Des Moines, died, and there were 100 people there from bands playing there at the cemetery. Another one where one of the trolley drivers died. So they took his trolley, stripped everything out of it, put a coffin holder stand in the middle of it, made seating all around it for his family, and then brought it out to Woodland on the tracks with 2 or 3 other trolleys full of friends and family behind it. So that was a cool story. One of the most unique ones, and we found this in the newspaper, with a photograph, was a Klan funeral back in the mid-1920s with 100 Klansmen wearing the white robes and holding their roses. And that's shocking to a lot of people in Des Moines. Like, oh, the Klan wasn't here. Oh, yeah, it was. It was really big back in those days, including some city officials and so forth. So that was kind of our criteria. So a lot of people ask about what was it like to write the book. It was 3 years start to finish, and start was the day that I caught Ganesh Ganpat on a tour and said, I want to write a book about the cemetery. And he said, well, so does Archie, but he doesn't have time. I said, perfect, he can be on my team, and we'll figure it all out. But and it took about 3 years from there to get it published. So it's a very long process, lots of research and meeting, and who are we going to include and who are we not going to include. So our expenses, as I mentioned, were paid by donors, which was great. We had a hard time keeping the stories short. Some of the more experienced researchers on our team, they could write like all day about somebody, and then they'd look at me and kind of crestfallen. I go, we have to keep it to 300 words. They'd be like, no. So John Zeller's the one who said to me, Samuel Clemens wrote to a friend, I would have written a shorter letter to you, but I didn't have the time. And that's kind of how it felt, right? And then the quality of the photos, I want to mention that because that was a really hard thing. We were published by History Press, who publishes a zillion books, and I'm sure you've seen ones about Valley Junction and West Des Moines and Ankeny and all different books that were published by them. They have a second publishing house called Arcadia Press. So it's History Press and Arcadia, and they have tens of thousands of books about historical subjects. But they do have some criteria for photography. And a lot of our photographs were, like the oldest lady, she's in the paper, she's very fuzzy, and it's not a good quality photo to put in a book. So we had to really, really, really hunt for photos. And one of the ones that we wanted to put in, we were writing about a couple named Joel and Leah Hendricks. And Joel Hendricks is out there in a lot of books down at the library. He was known for writing a mathematical journal. And very well known. What people didn't know is he had 6 daughters who helped him with that little task. So we found a picture of his wife and 6 daughters on Find a Grave. But on Find a Grave, the pictures aren't very high quality because that takes up too much digital space. But I was able to find the name there of the lady who posted that picture. I called her. She's in Calgary, Canada. She's a descendant of this family. And she said, I have that picture. It's 2 by 3 inches. And I said, can you do me a big favor? Take it to the best scanner place in town and scan me a copy. Here it is. Is that cool? Yeah, all in their long gowns. And then the daughters turned out to be, the mother came to Iowa in a covered wagon with her husband with a special rose plant on her lap. And I forget the name of that rose, it's in the book, but that rose still grows in Iowa thanks to her. She brought it here. And then the daughters and granddaughters were all involved in botany. There was one who lived around the corner from me back in the 60s and 70s, and she planted unusual flowers down in the woods behind her house and behind mine. And the Drake botany students would come over and walk around and try to identify, I see some heads nodding, identify those flowers. That lady, her name was Fleta. She's got there's a Fleta hosta that you can buy that's named after her. So a very cool family once we started learning a little more about the ladies, right? Not that Joel wasn't cool too. Okay. This was kind of cool. So I'm on the phone with this lady. She lives in Calgary. And we got to be kind of friendly, and we'd talk maybe once a month. She wanted to know, how's the book going, and how did the picture come out, and this and that, and we'd talk. And I said, there's something really cool going on here in Des Moines. I said, Mike Rowley and a couple other guys, they're finding out these bodies are buried under the parking lot over at the Burger King on East 14th. And she goes, those are my people. I was like, what? Yeah, well, their farm was right there. Right? Their farm was right there, and so they had a little cemetery on their farm. And when the city found out, I think it was 1930s, that overpass was being built to the south side. When the city found that out, they contacted the family and said, do you want us to reinter them somewhere else? And the family said no. But there's not even a sign there or anything. It was, I think, a woman and 2 little babies.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So there were so many cool stories like that were like popping up every day. And it'd be hard because we'd have our meeting where we're going to go and argue about who's going to be in the book. And we'd end up telling these stories because we were all getting these stories instead. But, okie doke.
The next slide is, well, first of all, talking to some of you guys when you came in, can everybody hear me okay? Okay. It sounded like we had people from Colfax, Cummings, Urbandale, Des Moines, West Des Moines, Pella, Ankeny. Did I miss any other towns? Earlham. All right. Where was it? West Des Moines. Oh, yeah, West Des Moines. Anyway, thank you all for coming out on a Sunday afternoon. I appreciate it. You know, everybody's got stories, and a lot of us probably have done genealogy, but the stories get forgotten. And so one of the purposes of this was to try to give a little bit of life to these stories and make the shelf life a little bit longer of them. So it kind of hit reality. I've done genealogy for a long time, and I think I'm passing it on all to my kids. And I was talking to my oldest son just a couple days ago, and he said, yeah, he goes, we couldn't remember the grandmother's maiden names. And it's like, oh my God, you only have 4 grandparents. It's not that tough, you know? Anyway, so we worked that out. But my point being is that how many of you here, we all have 8 great-grandparents. How many of you could name the name of every one of them? Yeah, most people can't. Good for you if you can. Let me ask you this. How many of you have a physical possession that a great-grandparent has given you? Few hands, but not too many. So one thing I'd like to have you consider or think about, one of the things they did leave us is, in many cases, a gravestone and a place to go and reflect and maybe remember their lives and research it and dig into it a little bit deeper. So I know all of you are famous, but let me shoot a couple of names at you here. You want to hit this?
Yeah.
So these are a few names that these people are all buried in Woodland Cemetery.
It's true.
I can see we have a literate crowd, so I won't read them all off to you. But other than George Reeves, he was a Superman in the 60s. Anyway, all these famous people are buried in Woodland Cemetery, obviously not the ones that you recognize with the names. So never be surprised. Now, the other question I got at the front door is, why are you in a Revolutionary War uniform? So there's always a link to everything to Woodland Cemetery. If you throw a subject out, I guarantee you, if you give me a little while, I can find a link. The link here is that the 5 original donors for Woodland Cemetery, essentially 5 farmers, all donated land. One of the individuals was Lewis Jones. He was the son of a Revolutionary War veteran. And he came to Iowa and he donated the land. You can see a couple of, a couple of other interesting items. He taught U.S. Grant. He was a teacher. He was one of the pioneers in 1845 in the city, and he was a farmer and donator of the land. This stone, he had no stone on his grave until about 2 years ago. So one of the things that I think the book has stimulated is a renewed sense of energy to make sure some of these things are not only remembered but marked. And there's the QR codes we were talking about. You can hold your phone over them, and it gives a short video. Some of them are 2 minutes, some of them are 6 or 7 minutes long. But it's not designed to tell everything. It's designed to get your interest, and maybe you keep researching. What do we got next? Okay, this is the case of J. William Case. So in a cold February night, about midnight, I'll get back to the camera so I won't make you keep moving it. But on a cold February night, you can imagine how dark it would have been in 1893 in Des Moines. No street lights. Certainly very few people had porch lights. And there was a doctor, Dr. John Overton, that had contacted a wagon master to meet him at Woodland Cemetery at midnight. So that threw up a little, questioning by the wagon master. He went to the police and said, I'm not sure what's going on here, but I thought you should be aware of it. So the police told him, keep the appointment, go out there, meet the gentleman, and we'll see what happens. So they're out there at midnight in the dark. All of a sudden, they see 2 guys coming up on the wagon, dragging the body of J. William Case. they had stolen his body from the cemetery. There used to be a medical school at Drake University, and in 1893, apparently, there was a shortage of cadavers to work on. So they were quickly apprehended, and when this hit the newspapers, the gentlemen of the Grand Army of the Republic, which was a fraternal organization of men that had served in the Union Army, found out that he was a veteran, and they felt a little bit horrified that he had been buried with no military honors in a pauper's grave. And so when you go out to the GAR section in Woodland Cemetery now, you'll see him in a very prominent place right in front of the cannon near the road is the grave of J. William Case. Again, that grave was unmarked for 125 years until just the last year or so. Grave marking, one of the things that people always ask is, well, how many grave robberies were there? Well, of course we don't know the answer to that. We only know the ones that got caught. But this gives you an idea of the prevalence of it. Some of the researchers started looking at all different avenues, and these guys, the names we mentioned earlier, were great. This is from the yearbook of Drake University in 1901. So they actually had a cartoon drawing kind of mocking, what was going on. I mean, never underestimate the comedic ability of a college student. So this is from the Drake yearbook, and then go to the next page. This is the Drake graduating class of 1901. They all seem very dignified. The name that jumps out at me there is Dr. Smouse. Many people know the old Smouse School, and Dr. Smouse, he was still one of the most revered physicians in the history of Iowa, and in fact, their donations still help fund the Ruby Van Meter School. I don't know if it was that Dr. Smouse or if it was relative or not. I just found it interesting. What's the next page? That's Dr. Smouse's grave and his wife in Woodland Cemetery. One of the things that we've put in over 200 stones in the last, since January of 2019, of veterans that were never marked in Woodland Cemetery. If a veteran has served and we can prove his service and prove that he's buried in a certain location, we can get a stone from the government for free, and then we have volunteers that actually install it. So the point being is it's never too late to do the right thing. This was a very interesting day. Rosanna Rush Merrill, I apologize for my voice here, but she was a Civil War nurse, and she had never received military honors. Her grave was not marked. We found out and thought that should be corrected. And the whole community jumped in. You can see a nursing honor guard in the background there. The Iowa National Guard sent their color guard. Family members attended, and it was quite a beautiful ceremony. I won't digress too much, but the Civil War nurses, they weren't always recognized as actually serving in the military. And in fact, finally in the 1890s, so this is 30 years after the Civil War, they said, we need to do something. These women gave more than you can imagine. They need to be eligible for pensions. So pensions were approved. Unfortunately, many of them, if not most of them, had died by then. So we do have names of them, but there are thousands of women that served in the military as Civil War nurses that will never be recognized. So when we get an opportunity to do that, this is what we do. What's up next?
There you go.
And these are a few more examples. So there's the stone we put in for Rosanna Rush Merrill. We also did a QR code for her. On the other side, Alice Mary Smith Cheek, her husband was in the Civil War. She served and was a singer of renown in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and actually said she sang at over 2,500 ceremonies, mostly funerals, but also patriotic events. And of course, Aunt Becky, if any of you have been to Woodland Cemetery, she's there. She was a famous Civil War nurse that at the time of her death, over 20,000 people attended her funeral in Woodland Cemetery. We had a 175th anniversary program there last September, or the September before, and we had about 600 people show up, and we were all worried about what we'd do with parking. Can you imagine 20,000 people? But it was quite a tribute to her. What do you got next? There are veterans buried there from the War of 1812 all the way through, actually beyond Vietnam and modern day veterans. These are just an example of some of them. William Busick and his father. The father served in the War of 1812. His son, who is next to him, served in the Civil War. on the bottom there, it's kind of hard to read, but Preston Jackson was a unique individual. He was an enslaved person in the South during the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848. His owner made him go along and serve him during the war. He was in war situations. 20 years later, during the Civil War, when Preston Jackson was finally free, he volunteered to serve in the Civil War, and he served in Company K of the United States Colored Infantry. John William was a World War II pilot that was killed in the World War II. There's a kind of a sad but heartwarming article in the newspaper at the time. His parents were celebrating, I think, their 30th anniversary. Mm-hmm. Both sons were deployed overseas. On the same night, they got a gift from one son and a telegram telling them of the death of their other son. So anyway, Woodland's not all veterans, but when we started, we knew there was a little over 300 veterans there. We've now documented 1,365 veterans there. So she mentioned that there's also some Civil War Confederate veterans buried there. Several years of newspapers, generally around 1909 to 1912, each Memorial Day, the wives and family of the Confederate veterans would say, "Would you please mark our family's graves, the veterans of the Confederate?" And the Grand Army of the Republic, in each of the articles anyway, said, "Absolutely, we'll mark them, but you have to tell us who they are." We've only identified, so they said at the time there was 29 Confederates buried in Woodland Cemetery. We only know of 3. Those graves have all been marked. The other 26 we have not found. We've searched obituaries. I suspect at that time it probably wasn't something that was often to come up in an obituary or other information. So we're still searching for those. We talk about who's the oldest, the youngest, the newest. We don't know when the exact first burial in Woodland Cemetery was. Excuse me. However, this young man, he was is the oldest stone that we found, and it's kind of hard to read. It looks from that photograph, it looks like 1818. It's actually 1848. So this individual was buried the year that the cemetery opened. This is the oldest stone, original stone, that we found in the cemetery. This was the 114-year-old woman that she talked about. So legally, you can see that her age is listed as 114, 7 months and 2 days. This is a picture in the newspaper where she had 109 candles on her cake. But I promise you, we found her in the census records. She was not over 94.
That's so awesome.
What's next? Do we have any animal lovers here? All right. So this is kind of an interesting story. Like I say, you can make any connection. So it wasn't uncommon to have funerals at the home at the time. And the cemetery sexton, Mr. McBride, while he was preparing the funeral for an individual, there was a dog, Queenie, that was always underfoot. Wherever he would turn around, she would be there all during the funeral. Then, within a day or two, the body was buried. And the next thing you know, Mr. McBride sees the dog actually out laying on the grave. The dog would not move. They tried to feed it, water it. It just would not respond to anyone. They tried to take it home. Nobody was moving that dog. After nearly a week, the dog, as you can imagine, is somewhat famished. Anyway, the cemetery caretaker's wife, Mrs. McBride, was able to convince the dog to come with her, and they took the dog home and adopted it. So pretty heartwarming story right there, but it goes a little bit farther. A couple years later, she's at her house on 42nd Street. You can go to the next one, I think. Is there one between there or not?
I don't think so.
Anyway,
Nope.
She lived on 42nd Street, south of Grand, and Queenie was in one of the upstairs. They used it kind of a sewing room, in the upstairs sewing room, and the dog was very agitated and trying to get the attention of Mrs. McBride. Couldn't do it, would not give up. Finally, Mrs. McBride gives up, picks up her stuff, walks down the steps with the Queenie, the dog, and as soon as they get outside, they hear a tremendous crash. The walls had been engulfed in flames. The ceiling dropped down exactly where she was sitting. She most certainly would have been horribly injured, if not killed. They both made it out safe. There was a big newspaper article follow up on it. But what I find most interesting is as you're walking along the cobblestone there, really in the front section of the street, you don't see a fancy stone to tell a story. You see a small little step. And I've been on this step. It's too small for you or I, but it's a perfect step size for a man or woman's best friend, a dog, to go up and lay on the soft grass. So kind of a neat story. We'll give you a couple of other things that just points of interest. So somebody here I met earlier said they had lived on 23rd Street. There was actually a case of a alligator that someone had as a pet on 26th Street. The alligator escaped, walked all the way to Woodland Cemetery. The caretaker, not Mr. McBride, it was somebody else by then, ran home to his wife, and she said, "What's going on?" He was freaking out. He said, "There's this huge thing. I don't know. I think it's an alligator." And he goes, "It's as big as a broom and broom handle. And I got to do something. I get it." So he goes back and he gets the alligator. Well, there's a picture in the paper holding the alligator up. It's about this big. But he did save the day. There was a problem with crows in the trees of Woodland Cemetery. And again, imagine. This is a time when your windows are open, when you want to cool down. There's not air conditioning. You hear everything. Literally thousands of crows would come in the night and roost there and just make an ungodly amount of noise. So they came up with all kinds of solutions to do it, to take care of it. The caretaker had his son go out with a shotgun, fired into the tree. One time, 17 crows came down. The city, in their wisdom, because the city council always has answers for everything, said we're going to put a 10-cent bounty on each pair of crow's legs. That went on for a couple of years. Can you imagine the person that had to take that collection and pass out the dimes? And how do you tell if it's a pair or just, Anyway, that went away as well. The couple of other stories, there was a famous actress that she was in Des Moines for a play, and she decided to take a rest and went walking around Woodland Cemetery, got lost, and she was picked up and rescued. I think we can go to the next one.
All right.
Anyway, those are just some of the stories. What's that?
Who was the other guy?
Nelsonetti. Nelsonetti. Yeah, they were favorites of my mother. She made me go to the varsity, every one of their movies. I was 10. I didn't appreciate it. I do now.
Is there any questions we can answer? Or any questions we can't answer? It's Woodland is a fascinating place, and I actually have plots there for my family, and I went home and told my wife, I was very proud. I said, my goal is to be the last one buried in Woodland Cemetery. And we're standing at the stone, and she points to her name, and I went, "Oh, maybe second to the last."
Whoops.
Yes.
Are there still open plots there?
If someone wanted to be buried there, I think they would find a spot. But again, newspaper articles from as back as early as 1905 say this cemetery is full. And then they'll add on a little bit. And then they'll say 20 years later it's full again, and it goes on and on. But I probably bought mine 7 or 8 years ago, and they found a spot. Now, I'm not skeptical, because I love the people with the city, but it's about 8 feet from the first 2 Civil War soldiers that were ever buried there in 1862. So I'm thinking the odds that mine is empty, I'm not quite so sure. That'll be a problem for my sons to worry about.
There you go.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'll get you one more.
So if you wanted to get a plot there now, what do they cost?
I'm just guessing, so don't hold me to it, but I would guess probably $3,500. It's not cheap in Des Moines.
Somebody just bought 2 on eBay, which is kind of interesting.
It was kind of interesting that the gentleman was a member of the press, and he got so enamored with our tours and with the book that he went on eBay and found 2 plots. So. I hope it was legit. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a section where there were a lot of unidentified orphans buried as well, and they're starting to try to find their
There is. There's several sections. So the pauper section, there's also a section now where there's a stone for Orchard Place. And for some of you that have taken the tour, you've heard that the original name of Orchard Place was the home of friendless children. You can't imagine a name like that going over today or at any time. But yeah, there was practices because there was just no funds back in the day. So we always talk about how things circle around. We think things are new and we're the only generation, all this. So I know the city of Des Moines recently has been dealing with the homeless and, what are we going to do? And are we going to find them and try to move them and blah, blah, blah. So I don't have the answers, but I thought I'd share with you an article from 1878, Des Moines Register. 1878. A resolution was adopted requiring all lots in Woodland Cemetery to be paid for before January 1st, 1879, and instructing the mayor to remove the bodies from those lots not paid for. So same old problems keep going around and around. Yes?
I know there's you mentioned the baby section, and I know there's a Jewish section. Is there a section for black people?
So the Jewish section is a private section within the grates of Woodland Cemetery. There also had been a couple of other private sections, the Catholic section, but it's now been turned over to the city, which was St. Ambrose. And then there was another section, is it International Order of Odd Fellows? Anyway, everything except the Jewish section now is under control of the city. So the other question, and one of the things I'm really proud of, and I shouldn't be proud because I had nothing to do with it, but I'm proud of the history of our citizens. Woodland is fully integrated. It was never segregated. There was one instance in 1866 where a city councilman said, maybe we should have a section for blacks. And it was quickly tossed out, and as far as we can tell, never came up again. So blacks, whites, nationalities, religion, there's no, now certainly, some plots were more expensive than others, so you may have that, but there's no segregation that we know of in Woodland Cemetery. Yes, sir.
I was told that Glendale initially, the southeast corner initially was segregated section for blacks.
Glendale was segregated, which is kind of ironic for people that weren't students of history, because here you've got a cemetery in 1848 that was never segregated, and then you have Glendale Cemetery, which was opened around 1915 or so, and was segregated. And it was to the point where they were about to bury a lady, they found out she was black, and they stopped it. So, it just tells you how times change, attitudes change, and decisions made good and bad are not universal. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What years was the winter crypt used at Woodland Cemetery where they couldn't bury people?
I don't think there was a hard and fast rule because you know how even now we're having a beautiful fall. But generally it would have been probably December to February. But I mean, if they had a thaw, they would go to work. So the crypt, the receiving vault that he's talking about, it's still there, but it would hold about 80 bodies in the back section of it. Excuse me. And the ground was too hard to dig into. They would just have to wait until it was possible and available. There was a front section to that receiving vault that, let's say your grandmother died and she was put in there and you couldn't make it down from Fort Dodge for another week. Well, you would tell them, and then they would bring the coffin of the loved one out to the front section, which was a little nicer. It's tiled. The tile on the floor is similar to what was used in the state capitol. So that, they did what they could, but you didn't have the equipment to bury them in the hard frost. Again.
What year do you think they quit using that?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know that I've ever heard.
I don't know either.
When did they invent fire?
John Zeller would know.
I don't know. I'm going to find out, though.
Gotta come back.
That's right.
Does anybody have any? Yeah, go ahead.
What's the time commitment on the stores? Period of time to
You know, I don't know, an hour to 2 hours.
two.
And are the things that you're talking about, most of them available on the tours, or are there places that are restricted?
If they're not, you hold up the book and say, what about this? You know, in some form or another, a lot of it's covered, but not all of it. And we try not to duplicate everything. We wanted to give people some things that maybe they would never hear of. We wanted it to be interesting, we wanted it to be verifiably true, and we wanted it to do no harm if possible. And you know, I don't do tours, but I've been out there with friends and they say, hey, will you walk around? And I've done it, and we'll be there an hour, and you know, I feel like I've touched 1/1000th of the stories out there. So one other individual, I don't know if you know this one or not. So there was a James B. Weaver. Anybody hear him? Hey, good for you. So we just got over the election. I'm not going political, I promise. James B. Weaver is the only other Iowan to receive electoral college votes other than Herbert Hoover, who of course was president. James B. Weaver ran for president several times. He got the electoral college votes in 1892. So that would be enough reason to include him in our book. But you know, we were pretty discerning. That's who cares? So the other thing that was unique about James Weaver is he was the I don't remember the exact number, but something like a great grandson of Betsy Ross. You know, the flag maker. Pretty cool, but really, it was an accident of birth. What did he do? He didn't do anything. So that really
You probably
wasn't
missed
enough.
the meeting that day.
Yeah.
You know?
Now, the thing that really caught our attention about James Weaver
Governor?
is that he was the great-grandfather of Hank Ketchum. Anybody know who Hank Ketchum is?
Dennis Smith.
He was the creator of Dennis the Menace. Now, there's a story.
That's right.
Give a sense of, I've only driven by the cemetery, but some of the places are just enormous. Do you have a sense of how much they cost in the day?
The Hubble,
Hubble.
it cost $65,000 in 1924.
And it's worth well over $1 million now. And one thing I didn't mention, if it doesn't creep you out, when you go up to the Hubble Mausoleum, I like to go to the back door, but I think you can see in the front door too. But you know, your eyes adjust and you can look in the window and you'll see that elevator for the coffins. You'll see that winding staircase. If you look in the front of the Savory Mausoleum, they were among the first people cremated in Iowa. You'll see their 3 urns in there and a marble bust of Annie Savory.
As you have your hands up to the Savory Mausoleum, it's kind of interesting because you know, your eyes adjust to the darkness,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you'll see a woman's head staring back at you. Because
Yeah,
it's a marble bust. It's beautiful. But
It's a little freaky. And then the Sherman Mausoleum, right? We wrote about Hoyt Sherman. He was one of the 3 Sherman brothers, General Sherman Antitrust. Hoyt Sherman. Hoyt and his wife Sarah are buried in a vault there at Mausoleum, and it was broken into back in the 90s when there was a lot of vandalism, and it was somebody dared a gang to go in there, and they actually took her coffin off a stack of coffins and opened it up and took her skull. Yeah, it was in the papers, and they took her skull over to the east side, and somebody found it over there wrapped in a jacket, and there's a newspaper photo of R.C. Wooters. For those of you who are as old as me, or remember him driving around his Cadillac with a Wooters license plate. He was like the only person in the world with a personalized license plate. And so there's a picture of him carrying her head in a jacket back into that vault, and then the family very quickly had the vault bricked up. And you'll see a lot of them that are that way. But yeah.
While we're talking about the Hubble family, can you talk about B.F. Allen, who built the governor's mansion?
Absolutely.
That's one of my favorites.
Absolutely, and you know, that was a decision that I guess the group let me make because nobody else wanted to be haunted by Frederick M. Hubble. But the governor's mansion in our book is in the section about B.F. Allen, not in the Hubble section, because he is the one who built it. He was Iowa's first millionaire. He went bankrupt, and there's a lot of stories about why he went bankrupt. But one of his bankruptcy attorneys was F.M. Hubble, who then bought Terrace Hill, which had been erected at a price of $250,000. Hubble bought it for $60,000. course, he sold it for $1 later on, so that was good, for the governor's ranch. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes?
Yeah.
Did you talk about the QR codes throughout the cemetery at all?
So Christine Bartley was the person that came up with the idea, and she got some partial funding to do it, and then she just took off. And like we said, there's somewhere near 150 QR codes. So she enlisted all of us to film some videos. If she could find descendants, she would have them do videos, and we just tried to do them as concise and interesting as possible. And then, it's not meant to tell the whole story of everyone, but it kind of leads you to maybe want to find some more information on them. For whatever it's worth, I think my QR code on my grave, or my land, not grave yet, I'm the only one above ground with a QR code. I looked a little heavy on it. I think I'm going to redo it here if I ever lose some weight.
Mike, there's no map of the QR codes, though, is there?
There is not. And I have been greatly frustrated. I'm working on it because to me it's like writing a book and then hiding it in a library and say, go find it. So we need to get that done.
I mean, people could do a self-guided,
Yeah, absolutely.
if that were
Yeah, I don't see a downside to it.
available.
Hey, Mary, you want to give a quick advertisement on the next book you're working on?
Not at all, but would you like to come up and do it, David? Are you sure? All right.
More involved than me.
David Barzin is with the Des Moines Historical Society, and he is sponsoring a little group of volunteers and team members to work on a book about the evolution of Grand Avenue over the years. And of course, it started out being the Adel Road, and then it was Sycamore Street, and then West Grand, and Greenwood, and Grand. And we want to write about the old homes that were there. We have a lot of pictures of homes that aren't there anymore, and pictures of homes that are, but also the businesses, the apartments. I mean, people back in the day didn't move to Edgewater, they moved into the Commodore, right? Down on Grand, you know what I'm talking about. So we're really excited about it. We got a little team working on it and hope to have it out in a couple of years, or faster, if it's up to David. Anything else you want to add? No?
I just am excited about it.
We are too, yeah, super excited. And a couple of the same people who were on the Woodland team, specifically John Zeller and Dave Holmgren, will be working on that book with us. Yeah.
Did I understand that the QR codes for Waveland is the first in the United States?
I don't know if that's true or not.
I don't think they are the
Yeah.
first, but they were, I don't know, very well advertised, if you will. And yes, although I've seen them in Europe too. I mean, I think they've been around for a while. It's just kind of catching on now with social media and all, Yes.
Woodland's the only one that has the QR codes here in Iowa.
It's the only one I know about, but I mean, anyone could figure out a way to do it.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of getting it done.
And anybody here, if you have family in the cemeteries, you can get a hold of us. We'll get a hold of Christine, and you can ask to do a video or have her have a video made for you and have a QR code on your own graves or
We're not
your
being
family's
filmed
graves.
offering her services, are we?
No, I hope not.
Sorry, Christine.
Sorry, Christine. Okay.
And actually, we are working with the City of West Des Moines Parks and Rec to bring those QR codes to the Jordan Cemetery. So
That's cool.
I'm excited about that.
That's
So
wonderful.
I'm stealing your idea.
Do it.
So,
Go for it.
You have copies of the book that if anybody would like to purchase it and have it autographed, I think that would be fantastic because I want one. So I want to thank you all for coming today to Iowa Files. I'm not kicking you out of the room. We're just going to stop the broadcasting. We take December off, and January something or other is our next Iowa Files, and it is Winnie Moranville, who was the former Date Book Diner restaurant reviewer, will be sharing information about her life story and her autobiography. So thank you for coming. Please sign up for our e-newsletter. I don't spam you, I promise. And have a good Thanksgiving, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Gail.
Gail.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes.
When are you going to do approve the